The topic of today's webinar is a reporting tool that is available to all users, and it is called Report Writer. So once you log into ServicePoint, on the left-hand side is the tab called Reports, and under that tab, if you scroll to the bottom, there will be an option called Report Writer. You will click on it, and it will come up in a second. Sometimes it can be slow. And you're going to click on New Report, especially if this is the first time you are using the feature Report Writer. So you click on Report Writer, and you will notice at the top that we have tables, fields, and filters. So Report Writer is what we refer to as a data dump. So you're going to tell the report where your data is coming from. That's a table. What do you want to see on the report? Those are your fields. And then filter is going to be a query. So for example, a filter would be a date range. I want to see data from January 1st, 2018 to September 30th, 2018. That would be a filter. So you have to understand where the data is coming from in order to create a Report Writer report. And this is where it can be very confusing because you think the data is coming out of this table and it's coming out of this table. And there is no guide on which table the data is coming from. So you kind of have to trial and error to find out if that's the correct table for the field you're looking for. So every report that you're going to want to run is always going to have client data on it, especially your client ID, first and last name. So that's going to be under the client table. And then you are always going to want to run a report based on a time frame. And that time frame is going to be your entry exit data. So that's going to be found in the table called entry exits. And then depending on what other data you want on this report, that's going to be found in a variety of other tables and or the assessments. So let's say, for example, the question called client location. Well, that's an assessment question, so that's going to be out of the assessment table. And so you do need to know the names of the assessments that you use. And you can find that by simply pulling up a client, going to their entry exit, penciling it, and at the top it tells you the name of the assessment. So the name of the assessment that most all projects use is the HUD COC ESG entry all other projects. 2016 copy. So I'm going to select that one. And then I'm going to scroll back up here and I'm going to go to my tab called Fields. And this is where I tell the report, what do I want to see when you give it to me? So I always want the client ID so that way I can go back and find out where a problem is with a specific client. And I want to see also first and last name. Okay? Now, what else do I want to see on this report? Well, I want to see that when did they enter my program, and I also want to see when they left my program. So entry date, exit date. I also want to see where they went. So that's going to be my exit destination. And then out of my assessment over here, I have all of my HUD data elements. These are the questions that you answer. So what else might I want to see on this report? It could be anything or everything. So again, it just depends. What do you want to see on a report? And they are listed alphabetically. So zip code, which is what I wanted to select, is at the bottom because it's a Z. Now I'm going to apply my filter. And again, a filter is a query. And every single report is always going to have a date filter, because if not, you're going to get the entire database from the beginning of time, which you do not want. So I'm going to add a filter, And I'm going to filter on my entry date, and that's going to be based on my entry date, okay? And what I want to see is data from within a certain time period. So my filter is going to be is between and including. Now I'm going to put my date range. So I'm going to do January of this year through September of this year, and I'm going to save that filter. Okay? Now, every report is also going to have to be specific to a provider, because just like with the date, if you don't do a provider, you're going to get every single provider in the database. So I'm going to add another filter, and that's going to be based on my entering provider, because I want to see my clients that I entered. So it's going to be based on entry, and then it's going to be on the provider. So I want to run this for Home Again Men's Emergency Shelter. That's my provider. So I'm going to select that. And then it's going to equal that provider. So I'm going to go search, and I'm going to select a provider. Okay? So I either am going to search by using a name, or I'm going to search if I have the provider ID number. So I'm going to do a search on Homeward, and I'm going to see who has entered into my coordinated entry project for this time period. I'm going to save, and now I want to see what this report's going to look like before I do anything else with it, so I'm going to preview it. And then it's going to spin, and the spinning could take quite some time because it's based on how much data it's pulling. So if you're pulling a provider with lots of clients, or you're pulling a provider and it's also a large date range, okay? So here's what I'm getting. I'm getting client ID, first name, last name, exit destination, and entry date, exit date, and their zip code, okay? So that's I like that, but I'm going to go back to my fields, and I'm going to take off first and last name, and I'm going to preview again, and I'm going to wait because I didn't want their first and last name on the report. I just need client ID. So again, it just depends on what you're wanting to see out of the database. And I also have a tab up here called Options. And under Options, it allows me to reorder these fields. So I actually want my entry date and my exit date before my entry destination, and I want zip code before their destination as well. So now I'm going to go back to preview, and it's going to spin every time you go back and forth between the tabs. So you just have to wait. And I'm going to have this report in the order I think I want to see it. So I wait for it, and there it is. And now I need to look at it because it's 871 rows. So I cannot look at 871 rows. So I'm going to download the report, download, and then it's going to process and process. And I have something over here in the left-hand corner telling me it's processing. So I'm going to wait for it to process. And again, the larger your data set, the longer this will take. It's going to give you a zip file that you then open, and it's going to automatically open it in Excel. So here's my report. I have client ID, entry date, exit date. I have their zip code, and I have their exit destination. So, you know, right off the bat, I'm missing a couple of zip codes. So I could go into that client ID and find their record and hopefully fix their zip code if I have it on file. If I do not have it on file, then I do not have it on file. So it's now in an Excel spreadsheet, and you can save it, filter it, print it, do whatever you want to it once it's in Excel. I'm going to close it and not save it, and then I'm going to close this little window, and I'm back in Report Writer, okay? So so I didn't like this report, right? I was just playing around and looking at the data. So I'm going to go back to my tables, and I also want to see if they have a release of information. So I'm going to select the table, release of information. I'm going to go to my fields, and under release of information, what I want to see is the date the release was added. I'm good with my filters. That date range is still good. So I'm going to preview and see what it looks like. So again, 871 records takes a little bit of time to process. So you just wait for it to process. And then again, I can't stress enough, the more data you're pulling, the longer the spinning will take. So over here on the left-hand side is my zip code that I just added. So I'm just, again, playing around, so I'm going to go back to my tables, and I don't want the release of information. Maybe I want to know household ID, because I want to know if people are in a household together. So I've selected the household tab. I'm going to click on the fields, and see, I want the household ID. So I'm also going to edit my filter and shorten my date range so that it doesn't spin as long. So I'm going to save, and I'm going to preview. And I got no matches. That's very interesting. So that means that there are no household IDs, or did I mess up my filter? So January 1 to May 1, my provider's coordinated entry, my field when I added household ID gave me no matches. Interesting. So this is what you will encounter when running a ReportWriter report. You will pick something that the computer doesn't like. And so if I take off household ID and I preview, I still have no matches. So I'm beginning to wonder if there's no data for this time period. Okay? And that's possible because this is a very new project. And this project started on this day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the date. I'm going to go back and add my filter for household ID, and I'm going to preview it. Aha, I have data. Okay? So you have to know your data before you can get your data out. So this is a brand new project, and it did not start until July 1. So here's my household ID. So I'm going to dump this out into Excel for you, because what you can then do with this type of report, once it's in Excel, is you can then sort the report on household ID to find out which clients are together. So I am going to do a sort on household ID. And so let's see here. 2 clients that are in the same household. So what we're looking for is a duplicated household count, household ID. And let's see, here we go. Here's an example. So this household has 2 people in it, okay? Now, if you're looking at this report, you are thinking to yourself, why are the client ID numbers duplicated? And that is because ReportWriter is a raw data dump. So as you can see, client 800 had 2 entries during my reporting period. So he is going to show up on a report writer report with his 2 entries. Now, all other reports that you run in the database are what we call deduplicated, which means if a client has 2 entries in your reporting period, you will only see that he was in your program 1 time. So Report Writer doesn't do that because it's a raw data dump. So you're going to see Joe listed every time he entered your project during that reporting period. Okay. So again, I'm not going to save this Excel spreadsheet, and I'm going to run you another Report Writer. So I'm going to go back to my tables. I'm going to leave household ID because I like that. But I want to see if I'm missing household relationship. So I'm going to go to Fields, and I want who's the head of household. Okay. So I select the field that I want to see, and I preview it. And I'm spinning again, so I just wait for it to spin. And again, this can take some time depending on the volume of data that you're trying to ask for. So if I scroll over here, I have, yes, this person's the head of household. No, this person's not the head of household. Well, that's not really what I wanted. I wanted to see the word self, child, husband, niece, nephew. I wanted to see the actual relationship. So I'm going to go back to my fields, and I'm going to select relationship and uncheck head of household. So this is an example that I mentioned about sometimes you pick something and it's not really the data you wanted. It is, you thought it was, and then when you look at it, you're like, no, and then you go back and you try something else. So I think this is what I want. So I'm going to click on preview. And again, there's no written documentation from WellSky, formerly known as Bowman, on everything about Report Writer. It is really trial and error. There we go. So that's what I was looking for. I was looking for self, daughter, son, niece, nephew. So, but you can see we have one blank. So that would be a client we would want to go fix. Okay, so let's say that you finally get the data you actually want. And now, besides downloading it, this is something that you may want to run again and again. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the tab called Options, and we're going to save this report. So I'm going to give it a name. So your name should be something that is going to be easily recognizable for you in the future. So you may want to use your name and then name the actual report. Or instead of using your name, you might want to call it the name of your provider. So it was Homeward, and it was a household zip code. And you may also want to date it. So I created the report on this day. Oops, this day. So that way you can come back to it. And again, we also have our, we can move the order. So I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to put this there. So I have named my report. I like the order, and I'm going to save the report. And you will notice that it's simply save and exit. There's no just save. So it's save and exit. So I'm going to save and exit. So now my report is in among the 328 reports that are listed in Report Writer. So all of these reports have been created by various users, and you can either search by scrolling next, 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 or I could go to H because I named the report Homeward. And there it is right there. So I come back into Report Writer, and maybe I want to run this report next week for a different date range. I'm going to click on the little magnifying glass that is going to open my report up, and it's going to process, so you have to wait for it. And so the idea of Report Writer is that maybe you want to run something once a month. So the first time you create the report, you're running it for the month of July. And then in August, you come in and you want to run it for August. Well, you do not want to save it again because Report Writer does not have the ability to save and replace. You would be saving a new report every single time. And so that means instead of you having one report, you're going to have 10 reports that are all the exact same thing. So keep that in mind. So I'm going to go to my filter, and I'm simply going to change my date range. So let's do it for the month of just August. Save and preview. So I'm just running it for the month of August. So it's going to process, and then it should come up here in a second. I'm going to download it to Excel and wait for it to come up in Excel. And I'm not saving this report because, see, if I go here to this save option, look, it's asking me for a new name. So you can't save and replace. You're saving and creating a whole new report every time. You don't want to do that. That's why you just modify your filter. So I open my report in Excel, and now I can do whatever I want to do with this data. I can save it, print it, filter it, and then I simply exit Report Writer. I'm done for the month of August. So this report now has been created, and it will be there basically until the end of time, or until you decide you no longer want to use it, and you can simply hit the trash can and delete it. So Report Writer, again, is a raw data dump, and it's a trial and error. You pick your tables, your fields, your filters, and you can dump out data that you may need for some requests that you've had. We look at it sometimes to see if we have missing zip codes. Do we have missing data, and we want to see every single client? Because remember, with the other basic reports that are there, they just give you a summary of the data, whereas Report Writer is a raw data dump. So happy reporting. Play around with it. It's a fun tool. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send them to us. Thanks.